Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Graham woke up that Saturday feeling like it was just going to be another ordinary weekend. Sunlight streamed through the bedroom window, catching the soft curve of Lydia's face as she slept soundly beside him. He got up quietly, pulled on an old t-shirt, and headed straight for the garage. He'd promised himself he'd finally finish organizing the tools scattered since the last pool renovation, and now he had the time. The house they lived in was exactly the kind Graham had always dreamed of owning: 3 bedrooms, a spacious backyard, and that pool he'd personally overseen every step of installing, treating it like a personal project. He was a civil engineer working for a mid-sized construction firm, and he took pride in every detail of that property. Lydia, his wife of 8 years, was a freelance interior designer who mostly worked from home, meeting clients over video calls and occasionally visiting job sites. She was beautiful, with long brown hair and green eyes that used to light up when she smiled. Lately, though, Graham noticed that glow appeared more often when she looked at her phone than when she looked at him. Graham was crouched in the garage, sorting screwdrivers by size, when he heard Lydia's voice coming from the pool area. She was on the phone, her tone upbeat, almost cheerful. He recognized it right away. It was her best friend, Jenna, whom she talked to nearly every day. Graham didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the voices carried clearly through the hallway connecting the garage to the backyard. He stopped what he was doing, not out of deliberate curiosity, but because something in Lydia's tone caught his attention. And then he heard the sentence that changed everything: "Look, if I ever do split up with him, I'm never getting married again. I just like being free, you know." Remarrying? No way. She laughed, a light, careless laugh, like she was talking about the weather. Graham froze, wrench still in hand, feeling like someone had just dumped a bucket of ice water over him. He tried to make sense of what he'd heard. Maybe it was just abstract talk. Maybe she was referring to some divorced friend. But the way she said it, the ease, the tone of someone who'd clearly thought about it a lot, pierced something deep inside him. In the days that followed, Graham began watching Lydia with new eyes. It wasn't paranoia, he told himself, it was just awareness. And the more he paid attention, the more strange details jumped out. Lydia spent hours by the pool every afternoon, always perfectly put together. New bikinis he didn't remember ever seeing before. Hair loose and shiny, light but present makeup. When they were alone at home on weekends, she'd throw on an old swimsuit and tie her hair into a messy bun. But during the week, while he was at work, it was different. He knew because he started coming home at random times, making up excuses about forgotten documents or cancelled meetings. And every time he showed up, there she was, polished, perfumed, lounging by the pool with her phone in hand, typing frantically and smiling at the screen in a way he hadn't seen in a long time when she looked at him. But what truly set off the red flag in Graham's mind was Colin. His cousin. Colin lived just 3 houses down, on the same quiet suburban street where they'd bought their homes around the same time years ago. Colin had always been close, but never intrusive. He was married, had 2 young kids, and worked as an industrial equipment sales rep. Lately, though, Colin had become a constant presence in Graham's house. He always showed up with a ready excuse: needed to borrow a drill, wanted advice on a renovation he was planning, or just happened to be passing by and decided to say hi. What Graham started to notice, and what made his stomach twist, was that these visits followed a very specific pattern. Colin never showed up on weekends, when Graham was home. Never in the morning or at night. Always in the middle of the afternoon. Always when Lydia was by the pool. Always when Graham was supposed to be at work. Graham wasn't the type to ignore evidence. His engineering training had taught him to spot patterns, to identify structural flaws before they caused collapse. And everything inside him screamed that there was a massive flaw in the structure of his marriage. He decided to act fast. He searched online and found a private investigator named Vincent, who had excellent reviews and promised absolute discretion. They met at a cafe far from anywhere Graham could be recognized. Vincent was a man in his 50s, gray-haired, with a tired but sharp gaze. He listened to everything Graham said without interrupting, making occasional notes in a small notebook. When Graham finished, Vincent simply nodded and said he'd need 2 weeks, at most. The price was high, but Graham didn't hesitate. He needed to know the truth, and he needed to know it soon. The 2 weeks that followed were the most tense of Graham's life. He kept up his normal routine, leaving for work at the usual time, returning at the usual time, chatting with Lydia about trivial things as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. He saw every gesture of hers through a different lens. When she smiled at her phone, he wondered who she was texting. When she said she was going to the store and took 2 hours, he wondered if she really was at the store. When Colin showed up 2 more times during those weeks, always with flimsy excuses, Graham had to force himself not to confront him right then and there. But he waited. He needed concrete proof, not just suspicions. Vincent had promised proof, and Graham trusted that. The report arrived on a Tuesday night, sent via encrypted email. Graham waited until Lydia went upstairs, claiming she was finishing a game, then opened the file on the laptop in the living room. The first thing he saw was a high-resolution photo, Lydia and Colin kissing by the edge of the pool, his hand on her waist, hers on his face. Graham felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. He scrolled down and saw more photos. Lydia and Colin wrapped in each other's arms in the water, laughing. Lydia and Colin entering through the back door holding hands. Colin leaving through the same door 2 hours later, adjusting his shirt. Every photo had timestamps. Dates. Times. Meticulously documented. Vincent had recorded at least 10 encounters in just 2 weeks. 10 times Colin had entered that house, that pool, and done whatever he wanted with Graham's wife while he was out on job sites, sweating through long days, thinking he was building a future for them both. Graham stayed awake all night, sitting on the living room sofa, staring at the photos until they burned into his retinas. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He just felt a cold, calculated rage growing inside him like a silent flame. In the morning, when Lydia came down for breakfast, he was making pancakes, as he always did on weekends. She kissed his cheek absently and grabbed a coffee mug. Graham smiled and asked how she'd slept. She said fine. He nodded and kept flipping the pancakes. He already had a plan. And that plan started that same day. Graham knew Colin had a habit of showing up on Wednesday afternoons. Vincent's report had clearly documented that. So, the following Wednesday, Graham called in sick, saying he had a family emergency. He stayed home, hidden in the second-floor office, waiting. Precisely at 2 p.m., the doorbell rang. Graham heard Lydia open the door, heard Colin's same ridiculous excuse, he'd come to return the wrench he'd borrowed weeks ago. Graham descended the stairs quietly and stopped at the hallway, watching. Lydia was in a bikini, hair loose, smiling in a way he hadn't seen in years when she looked at him. Colin walked in, and the two headed toward the pool, whispering and laughing about something Graham couldn't hear. He waited 5 minutes. Then he walked down the rest of the stairs and stepped into the outdoor area. Lydia and Colin were sitting on the edge of the pool, feet in the water, too close to be just cousins. When they saw Graham, they both jerked apart instantly, but it was too late. Guilt was written all over both their faces. Graham stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets, and smiled. It was a cold smile, empty of warmth or humor. "Colin," he said in a voice terrifyingly calm. "What a surprise to see you here. Again." Colin jumped up, stumbling over his words. "Graham, I just came to return the wrench, I swear, I was already leaving." Graham raised a hand, signaling silence. "You don't need to leave. Actually, I think you should stay. I've got something to show you both." He pulled out his phone and opened the folder of photos Vincent had sent. He turned the screen toward them. "Recognize these people? The silence that followed was deafening. Lydia went completely pale, mouth open in shock. Colin stepped back, as if trying to vanish into the pool. Graham continued, his voice never losing that calm, controlled tone that was more terrifying than any shout. "Let me tell you something funny, Colin. You know that wrench you said you were returning? I never lent you a wrench. In fact, I checked all my tools last night. Everything's still here. So tell me, cousin, what were you really doing here every afternoon?" Colin tried to speak, but Graham cut him off again. "Actually, you don't need to answer. I already know. I know everything. Date, time, how many times, how long you spent here. All of it." Lydia finally found her voice, trembling and desperate. "Graham, I can explain, it's not what you think," he laughed, a bitter, joyless sound. "It's not what I think. Lydia, there are photos. Dozens of them. What exactly do you think I'm thinking?" She started crying, trying to move closer to him, but Graham stepped back. "Don't touch me." His voice now had a sharp edge. "You lost the right to touch me the moment you decided our marriage meant nothing." Lydia tried to argue, talked about loneliness, about lack of attention, about how Graham was always working and never had time for her. Each word was a pathetic attempt to shift blame, and Graham listened to all of it with an unreadable expression. When she finished, he simply said, "You remind me of something you said a few weeks ago. That you like freedom. That if you ever left, you'd never remarry. Well, now you've got all the freedom you want. And I promise I won't stop you." Colin finally tried to speak again, mumbling about it being a mistake, about how sorry he was, but Graham looked at him with such deep contempt that Colin just shut up. "Get out of my house," Graham said, pointing to the door. "And never come back. Never drive down this street again. Never speak to me or any member of this family again. You're dead to me." Colin practically ran out, leaving Lydia alone with Graham. She was sobbing now, curled on the floor, begging for a chance to explain, to fix things, but Graham had already turned and was walking back inside. "Pack your things," he said without looking back. "You have until the end of the day. And before you ask, I already called my lawyer. The divorce papers arrive tomorrow." In the days that followed, Graham carried out his revenge with the precision of a surgeon. It wasn't violent or impulsive. It was calculated, methodical, and utterly devastating. He hired Catherine, a divorce attorney known for being ruthless, and presented every piece of evidence Vincent had gathered. The photos, the timestamps, all meticulously organized into a dossier that left no room for dispute. Catherine smiled when she saw the material and said this would be one of the easiest cases of her career. Graham also made sure the affair was officially documented, which in his state meant Lydia would have little to claim in the asset split. The house was in Graham's name, an inheritance he'd received from his parents years before the marriage. They had no children. There was nothing to fight over except a few pieces of furniture and household items. But the most devastating part of Graham's revenge wasn't the divorce itself. It was the public exposure. He waited until the following Sunday, when the whole family gathered at his mother's house for the traditional lunch. About 20 people were there, uncles, aunts, cousins, grandparents, all gathered around a large table. Colin was there, of course, with his wife and kids, pretending everything was normal. Graham arrived with a laptop under his arm. When everyone was seated, he asked for everyone's attention. "I have something important to share with you," he said, plugging the laptop into the living room TV. Then, without warning, he began showing the photos. One by one. Each image of Lydia and Colin together appeared on the big screen for everyone to see. The initial silence gave way to screams, tears, and utter chaos. Colin's mother went into shock and had to sit down and be fanned. Colin's father simply looked at his son with pure disgust. Colin's wife, who had no idea, started screaming and crying, clutching her children and running out of the house. Colin tried to explain, tried to minimize it, but there was no denying photographic evidence. Graham didn't say another word. He simply unplugged the laptop, tucked it under his arm, and walked out without looking back. The impact was immediate and brutal. Colin was cut off from the family within days. His mother refused to answer his calls. His father sent a formal letter saying Colin was disinherited and should never appear at another family gathering again. Colin's wife filed for divorce immediately, and with photographic proof of the affair, she secured full custody of the children and a generous alimony. Colin also lost his job, since he worked for a company where Graham's uncle was a major shareholder. A strategic call from Graham ensured Colin was let go due to restructuring. Within a month, Colin had lost his family, his job, his reputation, and had to move to another city to escape the shame. Lydia didn't fare any better. Her clients began disappearing as rumors about the divorce and its reasons spread through the community. No one wanted to hire an interior designer who destroyed her own marriage so spectacularly. She tried to reconcile with Graham multiple times, sending long, tearful messages, showing up at his office, even trying to intercept him in the construction company parking lot. But Graham had blocked all contact, instructed building security not to let her in, and simply ignored every attempt to reach him. To him, Lydia no longer existed. She was just a ghost of a mistake he'd made 8 years ago by trusting the wrong person. The divorce was finalized in just 4 months, a record, according to Catherine. Lydia didn't contest anything, she couldn't. The evidence was irrefutable, and she knew dragging out the process would only make things worse. She walked away with her clothes, a few pieces of furniture Graham let her take out of pure generosity, and a small sum of money he offered just to speed things up. The house, the pool, the car, all stayed with Graham. He sold the house 6 months later, unable to keep living in a place tainted by betrayal. He accepted a job offer in another state, a proposal he'd been turning down for years because Lydia didn't want to move. Now, without her, there was nothing left to keep him there. Graham moved across the country, started over in a city where no one knew him and no one knew his story. He bought a modern apartment in a high-rise building, no backyard, no pool, no reminders of the past. He focused on work, got promoted twice in a year, started going to the gym, began hanging out with new friends he met at the office. Slowly, the pain gave way to indifference, and the indifference gave way to a real sense of freedom, not the false freedom Lydia had mentioned, but the freedom of being free from someone who didn't deserve his trust. A year after the divorce, Graham was at an airport during a layover, returning from a business conference. He was in the departure area, waiting for his flight to be called, when he saw a familiar figure across the terminal. It was Lydia. She was dragging 2 heavy suitcases, visibly exhausted, her appearance sloppy and starkly different from the polished woman he'd known. Their eyes met for a brief second. Lydia stopped, dropped her bags, and for a moment, it looked like she might walk toward him. Graham simply nodded from afar, a polite, distant gesture, put on his headphones, and turned toward the boarding gate. There was no anger. No bitterness. Just a quiet emptiness where a storm had once raged. He walked to his gate without looking back, without curiosity about where she was going or how her life was. That woman was a closed chapter, a lesson learned, and nothing more. As the plane took off and Graham stared out the window at the clouds below, he thought about that line Lydia had said about freedom. She was right about one thing, freedom really was important. But she'd misunderstood what freedom meant. It wasn't about running from commitments or doing whatever you wanted without considering consequences. True freedom, Graham realized, was having the dignity to choose who deserved to be in your life and the courage to walk away from those who didn't. It was waking up every day without carrying the weight of betrayal, lies, and humiliation. It was looking in the mirror and seeing someone strong enough to never settle for less than they deserved. Lydia had her freedom now, but it was a lonely, empty freedom, won through the destruction of everything that might have held value. Graham had his freedom too, but it was built on solid ground, self-respect and dignity. And that, he knew, was the only freedom worth having. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.